All right. So those of you who know me, should I start now, Jeffrey?
Oh, I was gonna kind of give an introduction and then.
Great.
All right. So welcome everyone to our March Lunch and Learn. This session is entitled 1 Year Later, How COVID Has Affected Bethesda Project's Our Brother's Place Shelter. So we started these Lunch and Learns, I guess a little less than a year ago, but we are now, kind of commemorating the 1 year anniversary of COVID kind of being officially established a pandemic, I guess, declared a pandemic. I was trying to think of the word. And with our sites about a year ago, we kind of did a lot of different things to make sure everyone was safe. So we'll get started with that in a little bit. I did want to give a brief overview of Bethesda Project. If you're new to our organization, we've actually been around for a little over 40 years. We have 16 different locations around the city of Philadelphia addressing homelessness, ranging from emergency shelter that we'll hear a little bit more of today, and also permanent housing. And I think in a little bit of our discussion before we started this session, we talked about some of those housing options. So yeah, we operate many different locations around the city, working to get people into long-term independent housing as much as possible. But Charisma will talk a lot more about how that works. So yeah, our featured speaker today is Charisma Goldston. She's our director of our Brother's Place Shelter. She's been, she'll kind of introduce herself a little bit, but been affiliated with Bethesda Project for many years, and we're so excited to have her today. So without further ado, Charisma.
Hi all. Those of you who know me, I'm a conversation. I love to talk. So this is not, wow, I've been highlighted. Okay. Woo, this is great. So just feel free to just ask me questions. I always say I'm a twin. So how me and my sister talk, we cut each other off. This is how I operate. So hi again, my name is Charisma Goldston. I'm the director of Shelter at Bethesda Project, our Brother's Place. We're located at 907 Hamilton Street. I'm going to kind of go into like pre-COVID, during COVID, and where we are now. So pre-COVID, we served about 149 men per night. Those are the men that would stay in our shelter per night. We were also open to various church shelters for the entire day. And we also open our doors to walk-in guests during the day as well. So on a nice winter day, we'd have about maybe 180 to 200 guys who are in the building. We serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner at our Brother's Place shelter. We're never closed. We're always serving a meal. When we were open, we would open our doors to those outside guests. You could come in between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. and get a shower, warm up, fresh clothes, socks, social service support. So these are people who were actively on the street. They may want to touch upon services. They meet with one of our social service members to kind of build that connection and build that rapport. It's either refer them to another program within Bethesda Project or we enroll them. We've had 3 referral sources. So we have the Office of Homeless Services as one referral source. We also have outreach, and those are individuals who are actively patrolling the streets. Many of you see those individuals with these bright orange vests in Center City. They give us referrals, and we'd have youth referrals. So as a shelter provider, especially for those who are currently experiencing homelessness, it was important that we were always open and we were always available. The big fun part, COVID hit. And we recognized that people were still, actively experiencing homelessness. Everything shuttered, but when everything's shuttered, where do you go? When you're told to stay home and hunker down and there's no home for you to go to, this is when our Brother's Place was really, really essential. So we've reduced our capacity to allow for social distancing to about 120 men per night, and we're still full. We continue to be full. We have walk-in services during lunch for people who are actively on the streets, because we recognize that many people would come to us for a meal and services. When everything shutters and no one's helping you, it was that much more essential for our Brother's Place to still offer kind of like meal conversations with individuals. Unfortunately, we don't allow showers for walk-in guests anymore, but we have a great partner that did put 2 hand washing stations outside of our Brother's Place, as well as porta-john. So if people were still able to walk up and not only use the restroom, but also have a place where they could wash their hands. We still take outreach individuals. We've encouraged and called outreach for people who actively need a shelter bed. Oof, wow. I feel like it's all of COVID. It's like, what have we done differently? Everything. We still recognize that there's a need within the community, and we have filled in those gaps with the need. We have still actively housed individuals that are currently experiencing homelessness. We have, I mean, masks are required on site. We secured, I think, like 50,000 masks in the summer, and we give people masks whenever they ask for it. We strive to have an abundance mentality so individuals don't feel the pressures of the pandemic, but we recognize how difficult it's been for all of our guests who are currently in shelter. But we have the idea of if you offer clean masks, you offer constant cleaning and hand washing, hygiene practices, it's going to decrease levels of outbreaks. We've had several outbreaks in shelter. Each have been managed. Some have been longer than others. But every time we have professional companies that have come in to disinfect the building, and we still have that contract, thankfully. And for the most part, we've kept all of our guests safe. Even through the fear of an outbreak, we've still served meals. We have increased social distancing even downstairs. Many of you who've come, or I guess not many of you because it's been shelter, but those of you who have come to Our Brother's Place know it's there's 2 floors. The first floor is a multi-use space where we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. At night, it's converted to an area that all our guests are sleeping. Um, we've changed that. We've split the meals up to allow for people just to kind of have as much space as possible. So when they're eating meals, they don't feel crammed in. We've really opened our outdoor spaces. We've worked on, the beautification of these outdoor spaces. I don't have a green thumb. Some staff do. It's just not me. Last year we grew a tomato. Apparently it was good. I don't like tomatoes, so I trusted everyone's words for them. But a lot of the activities that we've done have been focused on, yes, you have to hunker down, but how can we be as supportive as a provider while you're hunkering down? How can we minimize you feeling like, okay, I'm in a shelter, I'm in this big environment, and I don't know what to do. That has also looked like really increasing some outside supports to those who need it. We've been very honest about mental health at Our Brother's Place, both on a staff point and a guest point. Some guests have just been honest and said, hey, I feel really afraid and I don't know what to do. And there have been staff who've stepped in and said, yeah, me too. Like, I feel the exact same way as you do. What you're feeling is normal, especially in a pandemic. So with that, it almost feels like, yes, everything has changed in Our Brother's Place, but a lot of it is still the same because we still offer a lot of the same services. We've been very, very creative in how we've offered services even a year later. We now have access to mass testing on site to not only support education around COVID-19, but also some preventative measures as well. We just had our first ever vaccine clinic at Our Brother's Place, and it was open to whomever wanted to get a vaccine that was currently in shelter. And for me, morally, it was important that not only did we have an information session, but the Philadelphia Department of Public Health and the Office of Homeless Services were on site educating people about the vaccine. We also offered a testing clinic where we have the health department coming on site, offering testing to those that want it, and then you get the vaccine. Many guys have really taken this and ran with it, where they now are educating others about the vaccine. The city of Philadelphia has started a vaccine ambassador program. And prior to us knowing this, we had guys that were talking to each other and really looking at each other saying, hey, this is a good thing. And kind of talking to each other at a level of support that we haven't typically seen before. I think when it comes to health decisions, especially in a shelter, they're all solitary. But with the level of support and community that Our Brother's Place has had in there, it has really increased the level of community that we could not have reached people before. We've had really great creative partners such as HAP, doing virtual clinics. So individuals that need help with any legal things, whether it be Social Security, a birth certificate, even some not so fun legal things, HAP has actually still stepped in to make sure that our guests are still supported. We've had the health department also step in for health clinics that have been extremely successful at Our Brother's Place. We've had students come and drop masks off, also focusing on education. We've had really great partnerships that have increase our bed barriers. So on the second floor, all the beds are like permanently there. And we've put barriers in between every single bed. So it's kind of like you have your own individual cube at our brother's place, which everyone loves the level of privacy that it affords and it offers. But it's really stressed to our guys that we actively care about your safety. And Bethesda Project will do everything to make sure that although the virus is here, we can minimize the effects in shelter. We've also recognized some of our most high-risk individuals. I know Marie and I were talking earlier about some health conditions. We know now that health conditions, especially some health conditions, can make you particularly vulnerable to not only contracting COVID-19, but also dying from it as well. And our Brother's Place has done everything in our power to make sure that that has not happened. We've even had, throughout the pandemic, we've had some individuals who reached out to us and say, this person in your community has passed away or was in your community and passed away. And we had a pretty large turnout, but we had a memorial for individuals that we were aware that passed away to not only honor those who are currently in our community, but those in our community who also left. So although COVID has been a pretty significant life changer to everyone, of course, at our Brother's Place, it has altered a lot of our policies and procedures, but it has not offered the level of care that we've given to all of our guests who've kind of come through our doors for any services. Like I said earlier, we still have gentlemen, we still do outside lunch. When it was the cold of winter, we gave you a bowl of hot soup, a sandwich, and as many hand warmers as you can carry, bag of socks. Right now it's getting really hot, so we're focusing on cold water, making sure that people have enough so they don't struggle or suffer from heat stroke, looking at the layers of clothing people are wearing and offer additional education. Again, although we're hunkering down here, we still are recognizing the outside community that comes to us every single day. They're coming for a reason. And for us, it's important to still engage with that community of people who are coming, because if you're still coming here, we know you might be still actively on the street. And we know that there's a trust that's happening. And we've had some guys who are like, okay, I will now try shelter. I will now consider shelter. I heard my friend has really liked it. We've had individuals who've been hard of hearing because their friend has had a good experience. They've now come to our Brother's Place saying, okay, you did a lot to help our friend who's hard of hearing and you got above and beyond. Can you also help me? So in that sense, we've engaged other communities that we just haven't engaged before because we've been consistent, we've shown up, we've offered support. And just because you're outside doesn't mean that you can't get the same level of care as guests who are in the building. If anything, we just encourage individuals to kind of stay in shelter. We've had many people who've come from prison in the past year on COVID, and they show up wearing the exact thing they got released from with nothing, saying, I don't know where to go. I have no family in Philadelphia. I did have family, they're either deceased or I just don't know how to reach them. Is there any way that you could help me? And we have been, very consistent in, yes, we can help you. Here's what we need. Here's what we're going to do. Like I said, our move outs have not stopped. If anything, it's all virtual, which has been fun. Get to do like FaceTime, seeing apartments with people. So we've been very, very mindful to adapt with the times. A lot of FaceTime, a lot of virtual meetings. They just look different, but we do offer that space. Even education. I think when this first started, I wasn't as like tech savvy on Zoom. And now I'm like, oh, I got this. Like, look what Zoom can do. And our guys will sit with us outside my office in the admin hallway. We've had guys go on job interviews. And we've been very mindful look at your background. Look, a guy wore a suit for a job interview. And we made sure that no one walked back there. My office door closed. He had perfect lighting. So again, this is just one of those things which we're highlighting that just because the pandemic has shut everything down, there are still people who are actively needing services. And we've been a provider who's been really focused on filling that gap of services.
Right, that's right.
So now there's been a lot of talking. I know there was three.
I was going to open it up to everyone, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more kind of about like the getting individuals into housing, like what that process looks a little bit more like that, who is there to assist them, and then what barriers do maybe, you know, a lot of our guests have normally, and then I guess you kind of mentioned it, but increased with COVID.
Sure. So, like I said earlier, there is a priority when we recognize age is actually a barrier. So those who are 65 and up, we have actively partnered with a COVID prevention space, which is now run by Bethesda Project, to move some of our highest risk individuals with their age and other health conditions. So those people they're off-site, still at the Bethesda Project, still considered a shelter, but they're on a very different priority list to prioritize them into housing. For everyone else, the process really hasn't changed. We still do housing assessments with individuals. We look at market rate. We look at subsidies, people who, may not qualify for a subsidy. There's been active and intentional effort to find affordable housing in Philadelphia. And we've partnered with some really good landlords. So if you are a great landlord, and we've had really positive reviews, because guys will call us and say, hey, I need help with my SNAP benefits. I don't know how to fill it out. We'll help them, and we'll say, how's your landlord? So we've had some really great landlord partnerships in which the landlord has really said, look, we like the guys that are coming from our brother's place. Here's all my vacancies. Here are some of the maybe income requirements, legal requirements, whatever. And we've actually kind of kept guys moving. So that hasn't changed. The barriers have changed on the other hand. So typically to move in, you need your ID, your social security card, your birth certificate. I think those are things that just the everyday person, like if I was pushed to, I'm sure I could come with my birth certificate and social security card. Those are two documents that I don't have just in my wallet. And when you're experiencing homelessness, it can be very difficult to take some of these most essential documents with you. So the drawback of working from home is that some of these agencies are working from home. So if you need a social security card, you could just show up to the social security office pre-COVID with your ID, your birth certificate, and they'll give you a copy of it. Now you actually have to send in your ID to then get both your ID and your social security card back. But I know many of us, especially on the holidays, felt the push and pinch of the mail system. So you send your ID in, you now don't have ID. And they sometimes want your original ID. So for those of us who are looking for, employment, because we've had guys, we've worked a lot of employment development, a lot of them ask for your ID. And if you sent your ID in for your social security card, you now either have to wait for ID to come back with your social security card, or you could miss out on an employment opportunity. So that's thanks to HAP. So really appreciate you, at Malley. The team at HAP worked with this pre-COVID actually to, I feel like she can say better than I can, so I'll just say that out there, but it essentially allowed for individuals who are in shelter in Pennsylvania. If you're born in Pennsylvania, you could apply for a birth certificate without calling HAP. So previously, HAP would do all birth certificates, Pennsylvania and non-Pennsylvania birth certificates. But HAP made it so that shelters and shelter directors, social workers, and one other category of people could apply for a birth certificate on behalf of a guest completely for free. So the cost of birth certificate.
You want me to jump in, Charisma?
Please, Pat, because I think I'm butchering all the work you've done.
No, thank you. I'm just, thank you for, and you guys have done an incredible job about processing these birth certificates. It has made a huge difference for clients. And yeah, it's shelter directors and social workers and attorneys. So we still do a ton of out-of-state birth certificates and those that aren't Pennsylvania. But we did work out that fee waiver, which is finally. But I did want to mention there's another process that we just recently worked out with Social Security to get documentation for folks short of getting their Social Security cards. So, you and I can talk as we go forward about who might need that service, because that's been a real impediment, as you pointed out. And I don't want to see people mailing in their original birth certificates that we worked so hard to obtain and then, lost in the mail. So
yeah. For those of you that know, Pat is the most amazing human being I have ever met in Philadelphia. The work that Pat and her team does is to say it is honestly life-changing for those that we serve is a deep understatement, whether it be securing income for adults that have never had income ever, to I think I've worked with some pretty complex cases with you, Pat, that have needed like several teams in there. And you know, you had one person who was at risk of going to prison because they didn't have, they were adopted and it was a closed adoption. And there was a person in New York that had the exact same name, like the mom's names were the same. Like this was one of those things where if it happened to anyone, it'd be a joke, honestly. Like it was someone in Social Security just saw both of the individuals and essentially combined them. And in talking with the other agency, we found out that the only difference between these two people was one was white and one was black. That was the only difference between the two. Social was nearly similar. The mom's names were very similar. Dad's names were very similar. Were in very similar places. Like it couldn't have been funnier if you tried to make it funnier. And have actually really stepped in.
I remember that. A shout out right now to our other partners with the legal clinic, which is this amazing group of private attorneys from law firm of White and Williams.
Yeah, great.
Who, are just, they do their pro bono work at our brother's place, and they have worked with me in partnership for going on 20 years. There, every clinic, they're there at the virtual clinics now, and so just another. No,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the hard part about being or experiencing homelessness is you don't recognize some of the barriers that are in place until you are actively in that position. You may understand, you may empathize. Like for me, like I mentioned earlier, like identification is one of those things where not that really big of a deal for me. I don't really think twice about it. You know, if I lost my ID, I think it would take me to be 15 minutes to get a new one. Yeah. My last ID was spelled incorrectly, and it took me, I think, like 15, 20 minutes to go back in there. And I was like, hey, this is wrong. I advocated for myself successfully. It was not difficult. I did not find it to be a difficult process. When you are someone who is actively experiencing homelessness, some of these barriers can take weeks to fix. Yes. And if you don't have access to income or income resources, weeks suddenly could be months. And when you're moving in some of these systems where a housing opportunity comes up, it could be very difficult to tell your housing opportunity, hi, I know that I've been matched for this housing opportunity, this housing match, but I just sent my ID for my Social Security card. I have a birth certificate, and I now have to wait to apply, you know, and also to call to get your income verification for Social Security. You have to call them. Before you can just go to the office, they print you off one immediately. Now it's, hey, I have to call. And I don't know if many of you have had the pleasure of calling Social Security. It's not an agency that's known to answer within 20 minutes. You know, you could be all day listening to the hold music. And, you know, our social service team who's on site, we have about 6 to 5 members of our social service team. They're actively making these calls every day. It could be a barrier, but our team, they are so efficient in recognizing when there is a need. Even when someone first comes onto site, they are overwhelmed. We have a great intake specialist who steps in and says, you know who you benefit from? This person. You and this personality works great together. And this is for us, it's that bridging connections of recognizing that experiencing homelessness is stressful. If you can have someone that either looks like you, talks like you, sounds like you, maybe it has been through certain circumstances, these are things that actively build trust within our community. So, you know, we have one of our engagement specialists works with guys who are younger. Why? Gets along great with them. He knows exactly what to say to them at the exact perfect time for them to stop lollygagging and get into gear. And we have some that, for guys who have persistent mental health, who need a lot more support, we have members who that's their specialty. They can take a guy who's really, really confused, disoriented, not really sure. I think I've seen case managers use Google Maps to find streets that people have previously lived on just for an address. So for us, it's about, during the pandemic, not only building trust, but highlighting that we're still going to be here. You know, like I said earlier, we've had guys who've moved on into their own housing and they come back eventually saying, hey, I got this packet. I don't know what to do. Can you please help me? And our social service team has absolutely stepped in saying, yes, great, we'll help you. I've talked to guys outside. It's a way where we can still make that kind of connection and build that community, especially for people who are actively experiencing homelessness, who may or may not prioritize knowing you or meeting you or knowing where to go. But if you find somewhere you really, really trust, for us, it's actually really important that we keep building that. Because if that's broken, you may never ever seek resources again or help again. And that would be really unfortunate. So for us, we look to fill those cracks, fill those spaces, take up these spaces to say, yeah, again, COVID has been here. We know it's been very, very stressful, but how has COVID not been stressful? And how can we still give our same services without much interruption? Maria, you're muted.
Oh.
Unmute me. How's that? Am I
Maria?
muted now?
No.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to interrupt you at that point because that was one of my biggest dilemmas with my brother who stayed there. I didn't realize that he could not fill out a form.
Yeah.
You know, I did not realize that. And after learning that, oh my goodness, your staff helped him fill out forms and information, medical forms, find doctors, find people, because as you know, he had lung cancer, he had emphysema, he had a dependency on drugs. So he had everything against him. And I knew, because I knew my brother had a very severe head injury. He had a bad accident, but I didn't even think of the fact that he would just go nuts if he had to fill out a form.
Yeah.
And I just send kudos to all of you because you all did such a wonderful job at getting him to try to fill it out, helping him fill out what he didn't know, he just could not grasp it. And, you know, my brother at the time before his accident and dependency on drugs, he had a scholarship to medical school. So, you know, at the University of Pennsylvania. So to visualize and realize that as a family member was so difficult. Yeah. And, you know, the way I realized that was I was speaking to one of your, social worker, I guess it would be. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it was for Angelo for his medicine. And I said, you know, I'll meet him at the doctor's. We were going to the oncologist, by the way. And he needed something, a form for something. And I said, here's the form, fill it out. And he just looked at me and he was embarrassed to tell me he didn't realize, you know, all of the questions. Yeah. And I'm looking at it and, you know, I'm not thinking he can't fill out the form. And he said, well, so-and-so did that at the agency for me. And when we got to the office, that's what it was. Now, remembering when we got to the office, they asked him to fill something else out. And he just couldn't do it. But he was too embarrassed to tell me. And then I looked at him and I said, do you want me to do it for, like, I did it very tactfully as a sister. And I said, you want me to do it for you? And that's how I did it. But I appreciate that. I mean, kudos to you for doing that and letting the residents there know that there's help. Even if you're illiterate, there's help for that because it's very difficult.
So to that, there's two questions, but to that, I would say it's common that individuals don't know how to read necessarily, which is our population, but the older you get, there are people who are glasses resistant. I've been wearing glasses since before I could talk, so I'm fine with that. So for me,
we understand.
Right, yeah, you know, so a lot of guys have glasses or they have cataracts. Like there's so many things. And again, reading is also a barrier. So you can tell when someone can't read it as a barrier because when you bring out a form, they get a little annoyed. And it's like, well, how about I do it for you? And there'll be plenty of times with guys, what we'll do is I'm helping them for some reason if the team is busy. I'll be like, oh, can I just read it to you? Like that way we can talk about what it is. Because again, reading it is one thing, comprehension's another. So there are times where it's like, look, legally I have to read this, but I'll break it down for you right after we finish. So so you comprehend. And I always tell guys here, don't ever sign something unless you agree to it. Like I always tell guys, if you don't understand, don't sign it. It makes no difference to me. But I want to make sure that I have your entire consent before. And like I know you understand that. So it's common, especially with a traumatic brain injury. Your reading is impacted, and people are really embarrassed to say, I can't read, or I can't read past a fourth grade, third grade, second grade level, especially when everyone's like doing things like, well, you're so fast at this. It's like, no, I'm not. It's time for me to learn too. So for Ida, we do have some people that are New Jersey residents, and I will work with the case management team on identifying those people. And yeah, especially people come out of prison, that is very hard work. Especially since we started seeing whatever age you went in prison and the length of time you've spent in prison, you're almost that same age when you're released. So if I was in my 50s and I've been in a prison my entire adult life, I don't have access to smartphones. Like one guy was talking to me recently and he was like, you know, it's so funny. And I was like, what? And he's like, you know, COVID, everyone wears masks. Everything is so different now. When I went to prison, I had to learn how to use a smartphone, a flip phone. He's like, I've never had a flip phone, especially a smartphone. And for him, you know, some guys prefer the simpler flip phones, which we love them. But for him, he was like, you know, some of these things that I now take for granted. He's like, when I first was released from prison, it was just a totally new world for me. So the guys who are just released from prison, we're very patient with them. Whether it's how they tie their shoes, how they move in the space. Like, you know, I think I've been called a CO warden more times than I think I care to admit, or they call our staff like CO, you know, Goldston, just because they're used to calling officers that I'm like, no, you call me Charisma. They're like, okay, Miss Charisma. I'm like, no, miss, just Charisma is fine. But it's a culture thing if you spent your entire adult life in prison. And there is, for Cynthia DeLauro, I think I said your last name wrong, so I'm extremely sorry, so please correct me. There are many people who are currently experiencing homelessness that absolutely do not want to go into shelter based on bad experiences. We understand that, and we absolutely don't push that. We still support them and let them know that, hey, we're still here in their services. So it's kind of like a slow chipping away as opposed to a dragging them into shelter. What I try to do, what my mission is at Bethesda Project for myself and how I operate is, how can I make this experience better than the last? I don't know what the last experience was. I don't know anything about where you've come from. I just look to run a shelter that is as supportive as possible for my JV or to volunteer folks. I love community. That was a deep pillar that was really important for me, and everyone who knows me, my personal life knows, community is actually so inherently important for me. And I want to run a shelter that isn't necessarily rule-based, that's not order-based, that's not like a dictator. That's not necessary anymore. I look to run a shelter that's community-based. So it's like, let's talk about this, right? Like, let's see how much we can have a conversation. And when people just don't want to listen and reject that, the best thing you can do is completely respect that. Because every decision that someone makes is their decision, and your decision is a good decision, even when it's a bad one and I don't agree. So when I'm talking to people, either it's not a fun conversation and it's a disciplinary conversation, the language you use is super important. So if they're like, well, you're kicking me out, it's like, oh, no. Let's really change that narrative for, I'm not kicking you out. I don't have that ability. I didn't wake up today wanting to do that. It's the behavior has made it hard to support you in the community, but like, what can we do to keep supporting you? Maybe not in this community. And it's not just language that I say to make myself feel better, not in any capacity, but it's highlighting, let's have a more therapeutic, supportive language where we're talking to people who are going through a traumatic time. And, you know, there are some guys, if I tell them, hey, if you continue with this behavior, this is going to be the outcome. I trust whatever you want to do, but I did want to give you full awareness of what's happening. So you talking to people who are on the streets, look, it's cold, it's raining. If it's cold and raining, you have a very difficult time staying warm. You are at risk of hypothermia. You could die from that. Nope, I want to do it. Okay, well, you are at direct risk of that. Like, this is not the best thing. What else can we do? I might push you a little bit more, saying, okay, well, I'm gonna give you socks. I'm gonna give you this. I'm gonna give you that. Just take it. In that case, it's a health and safety. I may tell them I have to call someone to help them. But for guys, you're like, look, I'm perfectly fine in the streets. I have my community of those who are here in the streets. To that I say, okay, well, I'm here whenever you need me, right? I had a guy, I guess, tell me earlier last week, actually, because I did a floor meeting last week. He's like, hey, Charisma, they're building up all this area. Will shelter still be a shelter if all these wealthy people come in? I'm like, of course we're going to be a shelter. We're going to always be here, And it wasn't to be super confident. It was just, we're going to always be here, right? Like, we're going to keep serving this community. If you're moving in, you can't push us out. I'm also an aggressive person in my personal life. I'll be like, you push us out, but we're going to still be here offering these services. So don't be afraid if new people come in. We're still going to be here. We're still going to support you. We're like, for us, it's not about getting these numbers, which I know in some respect we do focus on numbers, but sometimes if you just help that one person who you worked really, really hard on, as also just as a large success as you turning people out. For housing, we don't put people in whatever options there. We do make sure that they are happy with their decision. Because if you've gotten arrested in a certain neighborhood and from that moment your life totally changed, it would not be healthy for us as an organization to say, well, take it, you were given housing, you should be grateful. No, why? It's so triggering in that environment. We're setting up for failure. So we've had guys who've been offered housing and say, hey, look, the neighborhood, I don't feel comfortable. I've had really bad experiences there. I'm unsafe there. And we say, great, decline. Why? Unsafe area, significant concerns. We don't support that. And we find a housing option for you that is, hey, I'm really happy. I can kind of relax here. My family has a saying of take your coat off and stay a while. And it's not a physical coat. When my family tells you to take your coat off, stay a while, what they're telling you is relax. Take off these burdens that are there for you. Like, you're fine. Like, you don't have to rush. We're not going to push you. We're not going to drag you. You're fine. We're safe. We're going to support you. So it's a long-winded way of answering your question, Cynthia. That's the kind of environment that we want to foster, because we know through time, being that provider, those people that are really resistant now are not going to always be resistant. And they're going to come in and they'll be like, okay, like, maybe I'll keep my coat on, but I'll sit here. And it's like, great, that's as far as we could get, great, or when they do come here, sometimes I've had people be awful, just straight, completely awful to staff because they know we're not going to leave them. They don't mean to, but they know that, I have really good staff here who actively are invested in my well-being, and Bethesda Project focuses on my well-being. These are the trauma layers that I'm facing right now, and I'm not going to always be like this, but right now I am. And to that we say, we'll keep working with you. We're going to keep engaging with you. We're going to keep doing what we can do, even when sometimes you're like, okay, that was significant. But again, we're going to keep engaging. And those of you who worked in homeless services, I'm sure can think of plenty of opportunities where you're like, I think I had a guy one time throw a cup of hot coffee all over my desk. And I started laughing and I wasn't angry. I was like, the one time I do my paperwork early, this is what happens. I was like, see, this is God telling me, don't do your work early, Charisma. Just do it when you normally do it. If it's late, it's fine. We committed him into a hospital. He came back and the first thing he did was say, I'm sorry, Charisma. I was like, fine. I know you didn't mean it. He's like, no, I really, really didn't. I'm not dangerous. I was like, yeah, no one thinks you are. It's okay. Why? Yeah. I can reprint a piece of paper. I can reprint the paper. I told my boss, and I was like, Tina, the one time I do this paper early, this is what happens to me. I'm just telling you, Tina, maybe this is divine intervention. But again, looking at the services the Bethesda Project offers and how we support those who are currently experiencing homelessness, we know that taking a more patient approach and being family to those is actually more successful in the long term and actually has people who will eventually kind of come to us. So.
And thank you all for your questions. We're getting up to 1 o'clock now, so I'm sure we could, continue this conversation for hours, but I know Charisma is busy, so I want to be respectful of her time. I did put in the chat, if you have any additional questions or other thoughts or questions or anything like that, feel free to send them to communitylife@bethesdaproject.org, and we can route those questions to the proper direction. Those of you that are interested in volunteering, we're still on hold for on-site volunteers, but do have virtual and remote opportunities to support. And hopefully, as we heard about with things like vaccines and other things, hopefully can get volunteers back on site soon and work on developing some of those relationships we talked about. The other thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention is to support some of these services we've heard about. We do have a party and auction coming up on May 20th. I can put the link to that in the chat. And once again, that's our largest fundraiser of the year to help us deliver these critical mission services. Part of that is an auction, so we're always looking for more auction items. Or if you want to attend the event, it's free. You don't need a ticket. You can just come online and hear more about all of these things. So I will put that link in the chat. Were there any other questions, I guess, if you want to take yourself off mute, or thoughts as we wrap up?
Hello. I wanted to thank you all again. And I also am going to reach out to you for sending a gift. I want to make a gift basket. And if you could just let me know when the people come to you, can they come from any state and then you find somebody? That was a question that I wanted to know. Or do you find someone in their state that can help them that's affiliated with the Bethesda Project?
So ideally, if you're experiencing homelessness, please come to the shelter. We're not an organization that's like, ooh, you don't have PA residency. No, come to the shelter. Okay. If you want to go back to the state you came from, we would probably work with the Office of Homeless Services with that. As a quick story, we had a guest who was older, 85, came to Philadelphia because he had dementia and got really confused. And we actually found his family, and we sent him back to we had him here. He was safe, he was fed, he had his right medication. We worked with him to get, and his mate went back. Came to Philadelphia to come get him and took him back home. So if you just call the line saying, hey, I don't know where to go, seek shelter. We've actually have just been on the phone with people to help them find shelter in their state. But they're like, look, I want to come to Philadelphia. We tell people, come to Philadelphia, because we got to get you in the shelter. Because your shelter status is pretty important.
Thank you. And I'm going to keep in touch with you because I would really like to come to the shelter and talk. I know it's hard now to do it because of the virus, but I would like to come there and give some things out and collect. So I will definitely be in touch with you, and I will send a package to you for your auction, and hopefully I can get to see people. Is it in person if we come to the auction?
Yeah, the auction is all virtual this year. So I put the link in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, okay. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get to chat. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for coming. I think, we're at 1 o'clock now, so I'll close this. But once again, if you have any other questions or thoughts, I put the email in the chat. And once again, thank you, Charisma, so much for that wonderful discussion today.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate you all.
Virtual kisses.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Ciao, ciao.
Bye, everyone.